Welcome to Smart Supply Chain. It's a podcast for supply chain professionals who think and work smarter. I'm your host, Shireen Garrison, and I am thrilled to be joined today by our very own Brandon Marugg. He is our Chief Operating Officer at ALOM. Welcome, Brandon.
Hi, it's great to be here, Shireen. I think it's been a while since we've done one of these.
It has been a while. I like to get you on as often as I can, but, you're so busy these days.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to be a podcast star at the same time, and it's tough.
I know you have a busy life that you can't get that podcast to the top of your agenda list. I get it.
Well, I'm here now.
All right. Well, good. Well, today I thought we could talk a little bit about ALOM's journey. And for me, ALOM's journey and your journey are very much connected because you've been with ALOM since the early 2000s. And it's been nearly 30 years since Hannah started ALOM. It's started in 1997. So we really grew from like a pretty basic packaging and fulfillment company and really changed into much more of a supply chain strategic partner. And I feel like a lot of that change was influenced by the area that we started in, which is in California, specifically the Bay Area. And it was really focused on innovation. And I think that has influenced the way that ALOM has kind of grown up and turned into a supply chain partner that is very much focused on technology and innovation, and a lot of the clients that we've partnered with, and specifically you as well. You grew up in the Bay Area, so you've seen a lot of changes and shifts over your whole growing up and going into ALOM in the early 2000s. So I'm just wondering how much of the evolution of the Bay Area and innovation, and then specifically you being a part of growing into ALOM as well, how much do you think that is really influencing how ALOM operates today?
Yeah, I think it influences it tremendously, even, not even consciously. But I think to give credit where credit is due, it was a very conscious decision by Hannah Kane, our CEO and founder, back in 1997, that she opened in the Silicon Valley, right at the kind of beginning of the web boom, right in 1997. And she did that because she wanted to have a company that was focused on innovation, that put technology first, that solved problems via engineering. She wanted to find the smartest people that were available in the world, and she felt that the Silicon Valley made sense there. And in those days, the Silicon Valley was growing up and becoming a hub of innovation as the internet was exploding, and Hannah really thought, well, we need to put technology first. It's a lot of these technology companies in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley are doing. So we were one of the first companies to have what we called an extranet at the time, or a customer portal on the web. In 1998, that was pretty exotic. She also made a conscious decision to make IT a strategic department and not a cost department. And frankly, that's something that is still a little unusual today, where a lot of our competitors will treat IT just like they would treat facilities, right? It's a supporting department. It probably reports up into finance. It's a cost center. It's keeping the lights on, right? But not at ALOM. Hannah decided very early in the late 90s that IT would report directly to her, and that we would lead with technology. So, right, I came around in 2001. Just a little bit about me. So it's 25 years this year, coming up in August, and there's plenty of people in my organization that were born after I started at ALOM, which is a sobering thing. I stopped counting that, a couple of years ago when I first realized it.
You're aging yourself here, Brandon. You're aging yourself.
I know it's not, I don't look exactly the same as I started in 2001.
But you started in 2001 and you were actually in IT then. And so you were really driving what the technology plan was for ALOM and helping that to grow.
Yeah, that's right. We weren't a 5-person company. We also weren't a 500-person company, right? But we were large enough that I probably shouldn't have been reporting directly to the CEO as the leader of the technology organization back in 1997, but I did, and I always have. And so building the company from a technology first perspective has been obviously my entire career's work essentially since I've been at ALOM, and it's been so much fun to build the company in the Bay Area, having access to innovation and innovative people in the area, and that whole technology space, right, where we really look to technology first when presented with a problem, rather than throwing people at it or spending money in some other way. But how do we spend money correctly in the technology space to not only solve the problem, but solve it well, solve it with high level of quality, and make it easy for people to perform well in the actual physical operation of that solution, right? Because at the end of the day, for me, it was always about improving people's lives, and the quality would come, and the productivity would come kind of along for free. And that's something that we carry forward to today. And I think that's another thing that's very influenced by the Silicon Valley, right? The Silicon Valley has been in the business of trying to improve people's lives, right? We can have a discussion how well they've done that over the past quarter century, but that's certainly part of the culture of innovation, is how do we improve people's lives with technology?
How do you think that helps to set ALM apart from other companies that are in the supply chain world?
Yeah, I think it comes into with solutions, right? With the solutions that are sustainable, they're scalable, they become easy to maintain as we perform whatever service it is that we're doing for our particular customer. Fiona, our chief commercial officer, recently wrote an article about operations that should be kind of silent. If the customer is paying a lot of attention to your operation, then you probably are doing something wrong, right? We want to have elegant solutions that have high quality, that allow our customers to do the thing they do really well, and which could be product innovation or something like that. Designing the new product while not worrying about getting their existing product or their existing supply chain humming, right? That's really what we're for.
I mean, that's a great point. And that article with Fiona was really good, just talking about how you shouldn't be having your customers pay attention to what's happening in your operations. If they are paying attention to that, it's probably because something is going wrong. You need them to just trust you can get it done.
Yeah, exactly. The old easy button, right? That's something that I think Hannah still says every now and then about, we want our customers to think of us as the easy button.
Absolutely. One thing I do feel like you help to really influence how the culture has been set up at ALOM, and really this whole idea of innovation and technology, I think, got accelerated when you came into the company, just because of, again, where you grew up, but also you're kind of a giant geek in a lot of ways, Brandon. You're you're into technology. You also, what did you go to school for? What was your yeah, astrophysics. How does astrophysics influence things?
Yeah, I am a geek, especially when it comes to science and technology and really education. It's part of my training philosophy and leadership philosophy. I probably would have been a teacher, maybe a professor, if I had gotten lucky if I hadn't gone into the supply chain industry. So I really thrive on finding elegant solutions based on data without over engineering, right? You can engineer your way into oblivion, as I like to say. So you want to have pragmatic engineering that creates an elegant, simple solution that's easy to understand, it's easy to support, and it's easy to scale. And that's what I feel like we've done really well at ALOM over the past 25 years now. And then I'm hoping that a lot of that came from me.
I think so. I mean, I think one of the things also that I like about, again, what I think that you bring to the company is this sense of curiosity and, problem solving, and being able to really look at some of the challenges that our clients have or that we have internally, and, asking questions and trying to get to the bottom of it. And again, figuring out something easy to solve that, so that it's easier for the team internally and it's easier for our clients.
Yeah, for sure. Life. I think I'm certainly a lifelong learner, right, which I take for granted. But I think that's, people ask me why I've been at ALOM for so long, and a lot of it is that I get to learn something new all the time, because as we have new customers and new challenges inside of existing customers, we're solving something new, right? We're bringing to bear our expertise and our innovation to a new problem all the time, and that keeps me interested, keeps me excited, and yeah, it's fun. At the end of the day, it's fun.
Well, you've worked with some really iconic Bay Area customers and clients since day one when you started. One of the clients that started, I think, in the late '90s before you came in, but was still a customer when you were joining in the early 2000s, was a well-known tax software company. Whose name I won't mention, but this was one of the first, kind of big clients that ALOM had. How has that relationship evolved over the years? They're still a client of ours. I think we started with doing just flash memory, or no, sorry,
Even before that, so they're talking
they're not.
floppy
Floppy
disks
disk.
for a minute. Yeah,
Yeah.
floppy disk for a minute, and then on to CDs. So this was good. Our first foray with them was getting their product into the stores, right? The physicalness of the software product that was in a box with memory that you'd put into slots on computers. Ask your parents, and they exploded in popularity because they were a very early adopter of, okay, let's try to make this tax filing business a bit easier on people, right? Once again, let's improve people's lives with technology. And they had to get it to market. And this was before the internet could really support downloading it, obviously. So this is when you would walk into a store and go to a shelf and pick up the software and buy it and install it in your machine. And I remember we had trucks lined up, in the months leading up to tax season, to get the product out into the shelves. And I remember that was one of the first big things I came in to help solve for, was to really scale that operation, because it had gone pretty crazy over the past couple of years in growth, and we were trying to scale that operation before the technology was really ready to do so, right? So that was our first foray into modernizing fulfillment and things like that. When it came to that customer, yeah, it was fun experience, a fun one to get my training wheels on, for sure. It hooked me. I'll tell you that, it hooked me.
Well, another early win for you was Lexar. That was actually the flash memory I was thinking about. And I think we got with them before they actually went public. And it grew quite a bit after they came on as a customer. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. They grew a ton as well. They became kind of the leader, or one of the few leaders in the camera memory space at that point. At that time, once again, ask your parents. There were cameras that had little memory slots that you needed memory for, and Lexar was huge in that space. And we were doing all their packaging and omni-channel fulfillment. And we went through their IPO, their public offering, and that was another challenge that we faced, right? Because that was we had the entire compliance issue around going public, with very highly accurate inventory. Of course, the reporting of on inventory over the past 12 or 18 months or whatever it was at that time to satisfy those requirements. So getting through that kind of that was our first big foray that I was part of, getting into the regulatory space, right? When they went public in the early 2000s. I think they went public in 2004 or maybe 2005. I don't remember. One of those two. And they would have had a really hard time doing it without us, because we had their inventory on point and all the reporting that they needed, once again via that extranet thing that we had, that were still a little bit foreign to people even at that time. And they were able to get all the reporting that they needed to satisfy their requirements and have a successful public offering.
Yeah, which is an amazing experience to go through. I mean, one of the experiences that I have certainly been a part of is the growth and the fascinating journey with 23andMe. It's obviously a huge DNA company. And I think that you guys signed the contract with them in 2008, right before they were named. I think it was Invention of the Year by Time Magazine, and they really grew up after that, blew up, and there was a lot of news stories about this new technology with DNA testing, and that was one of our early customers. Talk about how that really influenced how we use that technology within ALOM, and also supporting a client. How did that kind of come together when their demand really grew overnight?
Yeah, a couple of stories there. I'll start with the demand situation. I remember that very distinctly because all this, they went from this kind of smaller niche company that maybe your friend next door might know to all of a sudden being referenced on Saturday Night Live and Simpsons. And there was a whole South Park episode. They were on 60 Minutes, but all of a sudden they just really took off. And like you said, Invention of the Year. And one year, I think the year that they got all that attention, they beat their sales forecast in Q4 by 7x, which is not 7%, right?
Yeah, seven
700%.
times.
Yeah, 7 times, and we were able to meet that demand, not without some effort, of course, but we were able to scale the operation quickly. And I doubt that anybody on the receiving end of those kits even noticed that there was an additional demand. It's not like anybody had to wait 4 weeks for a kit. They were still getting them the next day. So that was a huge effort to get that done, and that was a technology first solution there, right? It was we went from it. We changed the fulfillment model entirely over essentially a weekend to really accelerate their fulfillment speed, and yeah, and we're able to meet that demand. It was some late nights. It was pretty crazy, and once again very fun. And it's the kind of thing where you run 3 shifts, and you're buying pizza parties and things like that, and the customers watching things via BI dashboards and in an operations center, because everybody's just so excited about the amount of volume that's really pumping through. And it happened so quickly that it was very little like robotic automation that we could do. It was mainly about the systems and the system performance and the process. We had made some severe process changes, so that we were essentially shipping by serial number rather than by pick. It was an innovative way of capturing both serial number very, very quickly and having high output on each fulfillment line. So it was really cool. It was fun to do, and the customer, of course, was absolutely delighted that we were able to meet the demand. So that was huge. And what was the other question you had about 23?
Well, I mean, talk to me a little bit more about just the technology that, I mean, putting in place. I mean, obviously a serialized product, you want to make sure that Shireen gets Shireen's kit and Brandon gets Brandon's kit, because I don't want your DNA and you don't want mine. We want to know about what our own DNA is. So that's really critical. And, obviously there was a lot of work that was put into that, in addition to the operational team.
Right. I always tell prospective customers that have serialization, really know what your serialization means to you and to your client and to your ultimate end user, right? Is it a life and death situation, or is it a warranty situation, or is it, something about lot control? And if it's a life and death situation, which is, not quite life and death, but it's certainly, as you said, we don't want to screw up each other's DNA or have access to each other's DNA accidentally, or make a wrong decision medically because of some mixed results. So that's pretty close to life and death. And that's where we really honed our serial control prowess there. We shipped, man, I don't even know. We probably shipped 2 or 3 million kits that quarter, and we didn't have one cross contamination situation happening. And that's because we were building the quality into the process, right? That's not because somebody's inspecting at the end of the line and going, oh, that's Shireen's serial number. Yeah, that's right. No, that's not what's happening. Is you're doing multiple scans of the shipping label against the serial number in sequence, where you're not getting to process the next sequence unless the first sequence is correct, right? Where you have an assembly, think of an assembly line where there's a quality step built into each scan or each gate, and it needs to pass those gates before it can get to the end of the line.
It's a great example of kind of that human and technology interaction where, we put things into place so that it's not all just on a person, it's not all on the technology. You've got a mix of both.
Right, exactly, and it's still scalable, right? That's the other thing that's a big deal there, right? You could easily envision, oh, okay, well, you want to ship that many units, well, now it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks, and then somebody places an order because we've really got to make sure that serial number is correct. So we found a really good niche there where we could bring scalability and productivity to a very highly regulated and controlled, high quality serialization program there, and we were able to really leverage that into the life sciences and medical space, right?
And I
And I
think
think that's kind of where we were getting at.
yeah, I think, after we did 23andMe, we really decided to expand more into that medical space and start to look at what we wanted to do going forward. And I think that's when you got the ISO 13485 certification. I think that happened right after the 23andMe sort of boom, is when we were looking into that.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, exactly. And we started realizing that there was a kind of a missing piece here in an industry where, once again, the Silicon Valley roots of improving people's lives with technology. Well, of course, the medical space is all about improving people's lives. And what we found was the medical space was very highly regulated, but that regulation came at an extreme supply chain cost, from time to market, just pure cost of regulatory situations and processes being very cumbersome, right, to make sure that you're staying regulated. So what we saw was these medical companies that were, or quasi medical companies like 23andMe, that were trying to reach into the Silicon Valley innovation space, where they wanted to bring something to market quicker, that was not necessarily a heart transplant thing or something that would go into somebody's body, but that still qualified as a medical device, still had all those regulatory requirements from the FDA, from other regulatory bodies, and but they wanted to be able to move faster and have a higher scale and a lower overall cost of supply chain ownership, right? So bringing that innovation that we learned from 23andMe and from the technology area, technology companies in general, growing up in the Silicon Valley and having those customers, with high innovation, high iteration, bringing those two things together so that we could service these companies, these medical companies that were reaching over into the technology space, and these technology companies that are reaching into the medical space. So think like fitness trackers, and the company that we had that worked with that was also a medical device that was an air filter, right? Still a class 2 level, still a class 2 medical device, but really a piece of technology that sits in somebody's room and filters the air. So the cross section between these two things is a place where we really thrive.
And I think we were able to really investigate a lot of those companies and find future customers because we were digging into that a bit more. And we definitely learned a lot with, the air filter, an air filter company, and other, kind of medical device sort of customers that we've had over the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Brandon, no supply chain podcast can go on without talking about AI, because that's all we talk about these days is what's happening with AI.
I think the police come and they
for sure
take you away.
Absolutely. I feel like somebody would come in and slap my hand and say something about AI, because I don't feel like I can get out of any conversation without talking about it at some point in time. So we're right in the middle of, AI has been around for a while. But I feel like it's just starting to get to the point in the last couple of years where it's really, really becoming a big thing across a lot of different companies and not just in niche markets. And certainly it's huge in supply chain. I think, we're serving AI infrastructure customers, and we're also deploying AI internally, and have been doing this for a while. How do you think ALOM's positioned to really take advantage of all the stuff that's happening around AI today?
Yeah, in several ways, right? So one, it's a whole new industry, once again concentrated in the Bay Area, that we can help support as an industry, right, via the customer relationship, which we are doing, right? We have several customers that are in this space, that are looking to us to really help scale. So we have more than one customer that's providing hardware to the data centers that are driving AI. Some customers that are also in the design space. When I say design, I mean like silicon design, that are driving GPU design and that kind of thing. So it's a whole nother space where we can hopefully help the industry grow, survive, thrive, and scale. But then, of course, there's using AI as a tool, once again, to improve people's lives, right? In both our company and of course for our customers. So bringing AI to bear on internally when it comes to code creation and integration is already something that we're doing. So this is, I think we had an interesting project recently that's a fun story, which is about EDI integration. So there's still a lot of customers out there that we get that are on kind of old school EDI transmissions. So, and if you're on SAP and some versions of Oracle, so that's kind of some of the choices that you get for integration, right? Is you're sending over this edifact documents or other traditional EDI standards, and it's getting less and less supported by modern systems. But we recently brought EDI into our Anthropic deployment, and created a new type of integration for those EDI documents that funnels through AI, where AI is looking at the documentation for that EDI, then is actually looking at the examples that are actually sent in the EDI. Because shocker, the EDI signal that comes over is not always what spec says it's going to be, and it's making on the fly modifications or on the fly judgments about how to modify those documents to make them to spec and get them integrated real time. So the kind of thing where you would normally use a value-added network or an integrator or something like that is starting to replace that and accelerate it. So we were able to bring on an EDI trading partner without a van, without EDI specific software, just by using our Claude deployment to help facilitate the communication. So I think about one of the podcasts that I did for ALOM, maybe 2 years ago, I think, about a year and a half ago, on AI. And I had predicted that AI would be brought to bear on old school integrations at some point. And here we are actually doing it now. And that's something that's really been possible, I would say, over the past 8 weeks, 12 weeks, certainly 2026. That's how fast it's moving. That wouldn't have worked in 2025, and that's working kind of flawlessly now. And that's pretty crazy, pretty exciting, pretty crazy.
Any predictions that you want to give today, or anything you think is going to happen?
It's here to stay, that's for sure. Yeah. So I think about it too. It's fun because the last big kind of thing that we had in the supply chain coming out of Silicon Valley that was a big deal was blockchain. And it's probably been a while since anybody's thought about blockchain outside of a few very large companies like IBM, and of course the Bitcoin stuff, right, which is where it's still used. And the problem and blockchain fizzled out a little bit to go mainstream in the supply chain area, mainly because of the barrier to entry. You needed a lot of cooperation between all trading partners involved for blockchain to kind of work. And it was a pretty big investment for everybody. Mm-hmm. So it's really hard for people to come along for the ride right? And having a mom and pa shop trucking company come along for the blockchain, right? It's just a complete non-starter. But that is not the case with AI, right? AI for a couple $100 a month, you can start playing around and doing real things. So that's a big difference between blockchain and AI. So it's definitely here to stay. I think that we'll have winners and losers like in every other industry, and that's still to be determined, as none of these big guys have gone public as of taping. But when they do, it'll start to shake out a little bit more. And supply chain companies aren't going to be replaced by AI, but supply chain companies that don't use AI will be replaced by supply chain companies that do.
It's not a silver bullet for sure, but again, it just goes back to that kind of human and technology integration and interaction, that there's a lot of great things that AI can do, but it doesn't completely replace the human judgment, and you still need humans to make AI effective.
Yeah, that's right. So the agentic stuff gets a little bit creepier, right? So the agentic AI is when it's taking action for you, sometimes without asking, and making decisions. And that's really showing up a lot these days in contract negotiations and data privacy agreements and those types of things, where companies are starting to pay attention to, okay, who am I hiring here? Am I hiring a company where people are making decisions, or am I hiring a company where a computer is making decisions, right? So that's certainly something that we are taking very seriously and have not started down that road yet of AI making decisions for us. We have a philosophy that AI can make recommendations, but it's always a human, at least for now, but it's always a human making a decision.
Absolutely. Brandon, any last advice in terms of, people working with, companies in the Bay Area and our kind of culture of innovation? Any last words about innovation and supply chain?
I mean, I think it's never okay to sit pat with what you're doing, right? So one of our core tenets is continuous improvement. And for me, continuous improvement starts with innovation, especially with technology. And just because, if it's not broke, don't fix it, not always the case. You should always be looking at what your supply chain is doing, where it can be improved, where you've got risk, and where that risk is changing as the world changes. I don't know if you've noticed, Shireen, but the world is a little volatile these days.
Really? Okay. Oh, I'll check my news feed.
The risk and opportunity profile is constantly changing. So it's something you need to pay attention to all the time.
Absolutely. Well, I always ask everybody on my podcast one last question. And my question is usually around travel. But because you are such a little bit of a tech geek and a space geek, I am tweaking my question today to ask you, if you had the opportunity to travel and take a holiday on Mars, would you do it?
Oh man, that's a tough one. In the current state, probably not. Mars sounds like fun, but so think about Mars. Mars is like a warm, pleasant day on Mars is like being in Antarctica, except with no air.
Well, you have to have the right equipment on any holiday. You always have to think about what you're going to pack.
It's true. It's true.
Okay, well, I'll take that answer. That's good enough for now. But that'll happen.
The moon sounds like more fun and a little bit closer.
Okay, all right. So maybe you would have been one of those people that would have taken the trip to the moon.
Yeah. Artemis 2 that just went around fairly recently. That was pretty cool. I'm looking forward to the next missions for sure.
All right. Well, thanks, Brandon. That'll have to be the last word because we're out of time. But I would like to thank Brandon Marugg, our COO, and I really appreciate you being a guest here on Smart Supply Chain. And for everybody tuning in, we'll catch you next time on Smart Supply Chain, and you can check us out anytime at alom.com.
Thanks, Shireen.
Thanks, Brandon.